to the webinar. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope you can all hear me well. Thank you very much to everyone for dedicating this time to join the IATI Publishing Guidance webinar. It's very much appreciated, as I know a lot of you have now competing priorities, and I hope you're all doing well. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Petra Kangalova, and I am an IATI Business and Data Analyst, a part of the IATI Tech team, and I'll be presenting today. Margaret Thomas, who is also, she's Chief of Effectiveness Group in UNDP and part of the IATI Secretariat, would also be presenting today to kind of introduce and then give a bit more of a wider context of where IATI fits and in kind of the discussions around COVID-19. As you all know, and I'm sure most of you are also working remotely, the IATI Secretariat and our tech team members, we're all in different locations and working remotely, so do bear with us with any connectivity issues and all that. Yeah, I just want to make sure you can all hear me well, and I hope it's clear to everyone. I can see a few people are saying that it's cutting in and out. I will try speaking louder and clearer, closer to the mic, so I hope you can all hear me better. Let me just try that again. Okay. Can you all hear me any better now? Apologies for that. Let's just, yes. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Right. I will try this option. Thanks everyone again for your feedback. So, right. So I'll be running through the webinar today. A few etiquette things just to note about the webinar today. We've muted everyone so you can hear us well during the presentation. We are recording the session, so you will have a chance, or those who are not able to join, to watch the webinar afterwards as well. The webinar will last an hour, and as I said, we will be presenting, but there will be plenty of time for you to contribute as well. So there will be a bit of a discussion and question and answer session at the end, and we really, really would welcome your feedback during the webinar. Right, so what we plan on doing today, and the agenda for the 1 hour webinar session, is first of all, Margaret will give a bit of an introduction of the importance of transparency during a global pandemic. So speak about the role of IATI and what we have done so far and how the guidance has come together up to now. Then I would go through an overview of the IATI guidance. So I'll talk through who the guidance is for, what data needs to be published, and then I'll go through the specific IATI elements and the recommendations that hopefully you would have seen in the IATI Publishing Guidance that is indeed available on our website. And then we'll have around 20 minutes or so for a discussion, feedback from all of you, and then I will go through some of the next steps and how we are proceeding with that guidance. So I will now hand over to Margaret from UNDP, who can now do a bit of an introduction of the role of IATI during COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Petra, and good morning to everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks very much for taking time from your schedules to join the webinar today. I think it's very encouraging to have such a large interest from the IATI community. Let me first start by acknowledging that these are very difficult times, and on behalf of the IATI Secretariat, we certainly wish you and your colleagues, family and friends all the best while coping through these difficult circumstances. But I think we're all here today to really delve into how IATI can help play an important role in improving transparency during the COVID-19 pandemic. and our role in the Secretariat is to support all of our publishers to share IATI data on their spending and activities to address the pandemic. I'm sure we all understand that by publishing IATI data, we'll also be providing partners across the globe with better information to plan, coordinate and evaluate the response to the pandemic. So to support you, the IATI Secretariat has acted quickly to release guidance on how to publish data on COVID-19 activities using the IATI standard. We've taken a very collaborative approach, working with our humanitarian partners, including the World Health Organization, UN OCHA, Financial Tracking Services, and the Humanitarian Data Exchange to produce the advice to publishers that we'll go through this morning. You may also be aware that yesterday we launched a 2-week consultation to help us understand what further support we can offer everyone who wants to publish and to use COVID-19 data. During this time, it's also important to recognise that contribution both the international humanitarian and development sectors will play in responding to the pandemic, both immediately but also in the long-term global recovery efforts. So we're very strongly then encouraging organisations to publish both humanitarian activities and also those activities that may traditionally be considered as development responses. So I'll just end this brief introduction by encouraging you to work with the IATI Secretariat closely over the coming weeks and months. I think together we can help ensure that the data needed to effectively respond to the global COVID-19 pandemic is available and it is used by those who can benefit from it. So let me hand back now to Petya, who'll go through the standard guidance, and then this webinar will also give an opportunity to ask questions and discuss with the community. And as I said, further consultation to follow through the online process as well. Over. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Margaret. Thanks very much. So moving on to the overview of the publishing guidance, I think I'll reiterate again, as Margaret said, we acted fast in developing the publishing guidance and consulted with other standards and all that. And I think this is the first step, and we really want to hear from users as well, as the guidance is very much on the publishing side, but it's important to make sure that we meet the data use needs as well. So the guidance is very much written for all IATI publishers. So in IATI, there are more than 1,100 organizations publishing data, and we do want those organizations to be reading through the guidance and following our recommendations. But also the guidance is for the new organizations or those who will be starting to publish data to IATI and would link activities or spending to COVID-19. That would be relevant for them. The other thing that I wanted to reiterate, and as Margaret mentioned, is we do want to meet the needs of both humanitarian and development organizations, and that's really important in IATI, of bridging that gap and making sure that with that guidance, we are indeed providing an opportunity and guiding both development and humanitarian organizations. I will try and speak it again louder and clearer if anyone has any connectivity issues. So moving on to what data to publish. So this is a really important question and what we are asking for organizations. And I'll be going through the specific elements, but what is really crucial here is that organizations involved in those efforts to address the COVID-19 pandemic are strongly encouraged to publish data on all their activities and spending involved. So this would have a broad spectrum of examples, and I would just cover a few of those, such as, whether that's an activity associated with managing a humanitarian emergency, whether that would cover a UN agency launching an international appeal to fund their response, or looking at an NGO in delivering an increased medical and food supplies. There'll also be longer term development activities, such as donors providing additional funding for debt relief and all of that. But as with IATI and kind of covering both development and humanitarian activities and a wide spectrum of organizations, it's really important that all that information is captured. And I think the examples of what the data would look like, we will be building on that. It will be great to hear from people in the webinar as well of what those activities look like and spending and so forth. Now, moving on to the kind of specific and the more technical bit around what are the specific elements that we recommend, and as we said, in consultation with other actors in the guidance that we have launched. So it's important to mention, I'm sure some of those members might be joining us as well in the webinar, but the first thing I did want to flag as well is that it's something that we in IATI and the Secretariat, we recommend organizations to use those elements. Those are not mandatory fields or elements that will be enforced by the standard through like validation or so forth. So it's very much a strong recommendation that we have done with consultation with others, but also focusing on those elements with the importance of being able to then, when you look for the relevant elements and fields in IATI, to discover or to identify activities and spending related to COVID-19, you will be able to easily do that. So first of all, the first IATI element that we recommend you use is the humanitarian scope element. So that element has two types, so emergency and appeal. Our recommendation in this is that organizations who can use the humanitarian scope element and link to both. So the first one is an emergency, and that links to the global identifier, so the glide code that you can see currently on your screen. Some of you might be familiar more with the glide codes, and they're very much, a lot of them are more country specific, and this one was developed for at a global level. So as you would see, the kind of end of that code 001 refers that it's addressing a global emergency related to COVID-19. And by linking to that code, that's a globally recognized one that you can use. And then the second type of humanitarian scope element that you can use is the appeal, which links to the global humanitarian response plan that you might have seen has been launched by OCHA FTS, and I've linked the specific code that you use. So within the humanitarian scope elements, you can refer to both emergency and appeal. And the important bit to mention here is that our recommendation currently is for this to be used by both development and humanitarian activities. It's one where we've already had some feedback, especially from development organizations, thinking about possibly considering another element where they can link to those codes, the GLIDE and HRP, but not specifically in the humanitarian scope. And we really want to hear from you in the discussion section, especially on what your feedback and what you're thinking of that as the organizations providing the data. The second area of our recommendation on the publishing side is the use of the humanitarian flag. So this is a very simple way of tagging in a way your activity or transaction that relates to COVID-19 and identifying that specifically for humanitarian activities only. And the last but not least of what we have also recommended is the use of the title in IATI. So adding COVID-19 in the title of the reported activities. And I know in this area we've as well had feedback already. The reason for recommending that, given that we know it's a free text and is something that you add, is that it's simple and easy to implement and can be found using free text searches on existing tools such as dPortal or currently on the data store. Again, as I've mentioned, this is very much a recommendation for us if organizations face challenges in adding to title of their activities. There are also options to add to your descriptions and so forth. But this is a very kind of easy to implement way. And I think currently there are actually activities published already to IATI, I think nearly around 40 that are using COVID-19 in the title. You can already search for that. So in this slide, I very much wanted to focus on summarizing the kind of 3 areas that currently in the guidance that hopefully you would have seen on the website we are providing and we recommend organizations use. But as Margaret mentioned at the end, in this webinar, we would want to hear from you, any feedback on that, and through the consultation, so we can make any relevant update to make sure the needs of all actors are met. So following on from that, I think I just spoke clearly about the IATI specific elements for COVID-19, but what I really wanted to flag as very important as well, speaking about transparency and the data and how useful it is actually, in addition to all those specific elements, it's really, really important that all organizations also focus on good quality data. So all the activities and kind of spending and all that you're providing data to, that it's also timely. As we know, it's a very fast response, and it's important that the data is provided as soon as possible. But also it's crucial that the information is updated regularly. So with the progress of the implementation of the activity, so timely data is really, really important. The comprehensiveness of the data is another thing I did want to reiterate as well. So not only adding kind of the few minimum mandatory elements in IATI, but the kind of the usefulness of the data and the kind of specifying, having detailed titles and descriptions, specifying kind of sector classifications for the activities that you're publishing, the geographic information, location, whether you're providing results data or any of those other fields are really important as well for the usefulness of the data, those who would want to access it. And another important thing as a global pandemic where all international efforts need to be coordinated is also really crucial to be able to link those activities. So as you know, in IATI, organizations provide data from their kind of reporting perspective. And it's very important that you link by using specifically IATI organization identifiers or the activity identifiers to link relevant activities to the partners involved in the activities that you are providing information for, and also how you reference any of the kind of flows and whether it's incoming funds or outgoing funds. So providing those links is another very important discussion, another important point for providing good quality data. So those were the kind of key things that we wanted to summarize and flag, which gives us quite plenty of time to go through the discussion questions and hear from all of you. I will go through first the questions, and then we can talk through how you can all feed in during the webinar. So the questions and the feedback that we really want to get from you on the guidance is hearing from you whether the guidance really meets the needs of both development and humanitarian actors. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, there was specific feedback we've already received about the use of the humanitarian scope. So it'd be great to hear from all of you what the thinking is there, whether you can use that element for both development and humanitarian activities. Then we also want to understand whether you, given the recommended elements and what I talked through, is whether you can publish data on all activities and spending related to COVID-19 So as you know, with the standard, we do want to make sure that you have the opportunity to evidence that and provide published data on all your activities that are related to COVID-19. So if you identify any gaps or any challenges, that we really do want to hear from you so that we can address that and provide it in the guidance. We would also want to hear any suggestions, any specific suggestions on improving the guidance, and also if there are specific areas where we can make that clearer. So I think we'll have around 20 minutes for any questions. You can either add your questions in the chat box, or you can also raise your hand. You should be able to see on your Zoom at the bottom left, you'll be able to raise your hand and then either feedback or ask questions. I will try and accommodate most people's feedback. But yeah, just to reiterate, there will be a chance through consultations and other means for you to feedback. But please do raise your hands, and I would just ask people who speak if they can just mention their name and which organization they represent before they start some feedback. So great. Yeah, do raise hand. I think we already have somebody who's raised their hands. So I think I'll go in order. So Gunjan, if I'm pronouncing the name correct. Hi.
Hi, Petia, right? I'm pronouncing your name.
Perfect. Amazing. Yes. Hi.
Hi, I am from PwC India. I have a question. Since if we are not involved in humanitarian projects, but technical assistance projects where we are providing advisory services, consulting services, but we are providing a support on COVID-19 aspect in terms of advisory support, like for example, doing impact assessments or making manuals or assisting governments, can we highlight those elements in the IATI data that we publish? We can do that by one, adding the COVID-19 to the title, and secondly, we can add the description of the COVID-19 support that we are providing in the description of the project. So can we add these two elements to our reporting on IATI for projects which are in the nature of technical assistance?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for your question. I think I'll take a few questions and then we'll address them all together. Great. So we have Lipoi.
Yes, Aurelia. Hello.
Hi.
It's Aurelia from European Commission. Aurelia Leputra. Petia. Hi, Petia.
Hi.
Do you hear me?
Yes, yeah, very
Okay.
well, thank you.
So I was thinking, in fact, my question is about the fact that all publishers do not publish in a regular basis. Some are published in a daily, some other are published in a monthly, as us for DEFCO, and some other maybe every 2 months or 6 months like this. So this irregularity on a publishing time frame, we might be kind of issue on the reactivity. So one point is in my idea will be like to if will not be maybe possible to ask to publish separate file, IATI file only with the COVID in a more regular, like in a daily basis or something like that. That it is a suggestion. I don't know how to consolidate, if we have to consolidate on different publisher about this, and then we have to run over all the XML files around the publisher. Maybe each publisher could make an XML dedicated files. That is what I'm thinking of. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you, Aurelia. I'll take 2 more questions and then I think I would address them all together and look again at the chat post. So, Bill, I think you're next.
Hi, yeah, speaking now as a user of data, what I would like to see is, just as you're offering guidance to publishers, what is the guidance you're giving to users to say, this is how I can find data on COVID-19? And I don't think that's particularly clear. Now, that's why I think, I mean, looking at the comments, what so here, back by Leo is saying is, if there's a very simple way in which everyone does the same thing, they might want to do other things as well. But if everyone used the title, everyone can do that. And then it is possible to say to users, search for COVID in the title, you will find what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will address that as well. I think we had Herman raise a hand as well. If you want to ask your question, Herman, and then I will.
Yeah, I was thinking about the use of the COVID marker for the development activities and not for the humanitarian activities, because there are activities who are COVID related but not humanitarian. So did you consider to add the tag element, to use the tag element to mark COVID in IATI, or was that not considered?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I think I will start maybe from Herman's question and then run back and then have a look at some of the chat box, and do raise your hand if you have other questions. So the considerations about the use of tag, and that might be quite technical for some people, but basically that's one feedback that we've had. At the very onset of developing the guidance, the initial thinking was that both development and humanitarian activities can be published in the humanitarian scope. We've already had similar to your feedback, so that's a current consideration that we are having to, and it's from a technical implementation that's not complex to do. So I would really welcome any others or any other development organizations that feel strongly that that's a better option for publishing to get involved, and I'll speak a bit about the consultation we're having on IATI Discuss, but also just getting in touch with us directly, directly to feed that in, and then after 2 weeks we'll be happy to incorporate if there is a strong need for that, as it seems like we've had a few mentions of that. Bill's question on the users, yes, very much. I think we do want to do, and that's part of kind of our plan of providing the guidance to people. At the moment and in the next 2 weeks, I think the thinking is to make sure that before we head into advising users how to search the data, to make sure we have consulted on with users, but as well as with publishers, or what are the right elements. So one was around the title. Now we're talking about the use of humanitarian scope and tag. So to be able to clearly direct users. And then in the coming weeks, for sure, we do want to potentially set another webinar or another discussion where we can showcase to users how to use the data. Another question from the European Commission, and I think that question was around how regularly the data is updated, and how I think that's more of a technical question, Aurelia. And I don't think it's up to organizations, I think, to decide how they, how they feed in or split their files in a way. And I think if there are activities related to COVID-19, you can already update that specific activity more regularly. So you can do that without having to do that kind of technical split. And on PwC's question, I would say very much yes to that. As I said at the very beginning of the presentation on all activities and spending, I think that is indeed kind of technical assistance would fall into a type of activity related to COVID-19. So yes, for sure, we would expect that information to be provided via IATI. Are there any other? I think Aurelia has a follow-up question, and then I will try and go through some of the questions, see if any of the other people from the tech team would want to feed in. Aurelia.
Okay, Peter, Petia, I'm sorry, I'm going to insist again, but it's the fact is that we are publishing and we are using the data. So if the files remain like they are, which means that we have to publish, we generate and we build up and we publish monthly like almost 400 files, which means if you want more often information, I mean, the importance of the COVID is to be, of this issue is to be as reactive as possible. So I guess the most interesting way of publishing will be on a daily basis. So the information is up to date in a daily basis for everyone. Then on this matter, if I have to generate and publish in a daily basis 400 files for, I don't know, let's say like 10 or 20 or 50 IATI activity related to COVID, it's a huge work for me and for other huge publisher. And in the same time, we have these tools, which is EUD Explorer, which usually we imported around 1,000 files, more than 1,000 files, XML files from IATI for the member states, which means like 2-3 days work of data to import this information. And again, we will not be able to display before 1 month and a half some data. So I wonder if for the other publisher or people are using this, if they are, I don't know, not concerned of the use of data to reload fully this, if it remain in the same files. Why I'm thinking that having a separate files for every publisher might be useful for everyone.
And I think that's something that may be kind of directly speaking to other publishers, and that's why we do have the consultation of how you would approach that will be another way of going forward. I will now run through a few of the questions in the chat and see if I can address some of them or if people have any follow-up. So in terms of plans to, develop any specific data visualization dashboard based on COVID-19, I think that's very much one thing I was going to speak to at the end of the presentation about ensuring that, first of all of our IATI tools, such as the D portal and data store, you can easily find the information using those elements. So a specific dashboard at the moment, there isn't a plan for it. But as you know, all those things are developing quite fast. So we do want to make sure that users can easily access the data. And the first step would be ensuring that you can do that through the portal and the data store. So some questions on how you report funds, diverted from development projects to COVID-19 activities. I think really good questions, and I think we've had similar questions from others about when there are changes on diverting activities, and how that's reported. So obviously in IATI you can develop that at a transaction level, but I think that's a very good question to actually hear from others and involved in the consultation of how you would actually track that. Some more technical questions, which I think are very good, about specifying the discussion around the use of tag element or humanitarian scope, which is indeed correct that at the moment you can only do that at activity level. It will be really good to hear on examples of how you do that, and how specifically related to COVID-19 activities, whether that would have an implication for splitting that activity to be able to address that. So I think that's very relevant to the technical consultation that we have currently on IATI Discuss for you to feed into that. Moving on to some of the other questions. Some around, again, the use of the data, and the use of the data store. which will ensure that's incorporated. Some questions around the difference to COVID-19 and generic COVID activities. I think a lot of the questions you're raising in the chat box are very, very useful as well to involve more people in the consultation on that. So question around the results element, that's very, very relevant, and we've not incorporated anything yet on that use. So if others have any contributions, that's really beneficial, and we'll be capturing that to see if we can incorporate that. About the Secretariat reaching out to other organizations, yeah, I don't know if anyone else would want to feed into to some of those questions, but yeah, it's very much on our engagement plan. And as you know, now one of the steps is sharing the webinar and consultation, but also more directly reach to members and other organizations where you can respond. I will stop for a bit to see if any other people would want to raise questions and have a look through the upcoming ones. But that's been really, really beneficial, because I think on a lot of the questions we do have to find answers, and it's good to raise them, because that was the main point of starting the guidance and getting your questions. Any other raised hands on this? Right. So let me go through some of the other questions. Really useful feedback from some on the kind of current publishing tools and what options they're providing on that. So I think a lot of things are coming up in terms of how within your activities and how you would, whether you would separate a file or not. Some more technical discussions I can see already, and I can see Amy is responding as well on how Glide can be incorporated. Exactly. So Michelle, you have your hands raised.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, because I'm following this chat and I'm spinning. I can't read it that fast. But the challenge I have, or that I know we're gonna have, one, we have an automated process that extracts the data from our system. So splitting up the files might not be practical, but it wouldn't be necessary because it is all automated. So for us, it doesn't matter that we have large volumes of data. It can refresh pretty quickly. But at the same time, that is going to be a challenge for us because we are working right now to enhance our current systems to capture the data. And for us to get that captured in our own systems hasn't even been technically sorted. So for us to then grab it into IATI, we're going to be really struggling to include the titles. Probably the only element we'll be able to control, because we don't even currently publish glide codes. We don't have a place in our system to store it. We are still working on storing our humanitarian appeal information. So unfortunately, we're just not at a situation where all the suggestions that you're talking about are even in our system to pull. And because our pull is automated, we're gonna struggle. So I saw the question about is the Secretariat going to reach out to entities or publishers who are doing COVID but not using the guidance. I can tell you right now, we're probably already going to be one of those ones that just can't get it into the data other than in the title. Yeah. So not so much a question, rather just sort of where we're coming from.
Useful, Michelle, because I think for us to very much, develop the guidance, we really want to have that feedback and to understand what's feasible or what's in the short term you can do, and whether it's in line with the recommendation, which is really, really useful. I can see Rory has his hand up as well. Hi, Rory.
Hello. Thanks everyone for this. I think just bouncing off Michelle's point there, I think this just highlights the need for us to have a few options and for us to be aware of what all different publishers are doing, so that we can create customized queries on the data store and hopefully put eyes together and make visualizations and things like that. Because I know from experience, publishers like UNHCR, for example, probably won't be using the title workaround. They'll certainly be using the humanitarian scope option, just because their activities are so high level. It's sort of like operations in Syria or operations in, a whole region. So I think just to underline points about compiling those queries together and the guidance for users is going to be really important, because we'll probably need to say, look for activities which either have this humanitarian scope element or have it in the title or have something else. I think that links back to the points about the tag element versus the humanitarian scope element. I think my position is it's not going to be too difficult to implement either from the Department for International Development's perspective. I think just knowing what's going to be the most useful to people, and it'd be quite interesting to get people's thoughts around some questions raised around the intuitiveness of each of those. I think there's some quite interesting trade-offs there. Tag element's not that well used at the moment, and it's quite hard to implement for people that have already got a publishing process in place, but then humanitarian scope's not necessarily something you'd look for if you were looking at development activities. So so I think whilst we'll definitely endeavour to put COVID-19 in all of our titles where we can, I think that question is quite an important one just to think through, particularly because I think we'll want to put something in a classification somewhere just for posterity, and because ultimately the short-term fix will eventually turn into a long-term solution. So I'm interested to hear people's thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I think that's, again, useful to know from different types of organizations what you are able or not to do. And we really want to hear from any users of the data or any, so I would welcome if anyone in the webinar is actually coming more from a user side and would want to feedback, please do raise your hand. Just to mention, because I know there's a lot of activity at the moment in the chat box, which is extremely useful, and conversations already going around a specific element around, use of title and all that. And as at the moment, I cannot address them all. What we will do is definitely summarize your feedback from the chat box, but also there were specific questions that we have not yet answered. So we will make sure that we put those questions and then provide answers and share that with people. But do continue feeding in just to make sure that questions not going to be left unanswered. Great, so we have Leo and Mark raise their hands. Leo, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think it's good to have a second webinar in 2 months' time, because for all of us, both the publishing and the data use, we are all kind of emerging COVID data publishers and emerging COVID data users. So if we can have like a new webinar in 2 months' time where we can have lessons learned, or maybe in 4 weeks' time, I don't know, that would be really helpful, I think.
Thank you, Leo. And definitely, I think that's definitely within our plan. That's what we were also expecting from this webinar, is to start the conversation, get initial feedback, questions that we might not have an answers to yet, but we will be working on that and providing those answers. And for sure, I think we will be planning another webinar and being able to look at that. So we have Mark next.
Hi there. This is Mark Bruff, working with development initiatives on the Grand Bargain. We're someone asked in the comments also. We are working on a simple visualization hopefully quite quickly, to show data from the UNOCHA FTS, and in terms of the contributions, and then IATI data in terms of projects. And hopefully we should have something out, I think, within the next couple of weeks is our aim, to get something together really quickly. I would definitely support Bill's comment on the need for guidance for users, and I think it would be really helpful to have both the publisher guidance and the user guidance, if not at the same time, then kind of around the same time as each other, because I think they should inform each other as well, to make sure that the guidance being given to publishers is such that, you know, it can easily be accessed, that data from various kind of IATI tools, and particularly obviously from the data store. And the only thing I would say is, yeah, to publishers, you know, anything you can do to get your data into, you know, a sort of shape, a bit like what Rory said, you know, any of the options, I guess, as much as you can do as possible, you know, and get the data being published as quickly as possible will really help, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's a strong message from everyone. And we do need a user guidance as soon as possible. And thanks, Mark, for the update on what you're working on from a Grand Bargain perspective. And I think that's another opportunity in this webinar, but consultations and other forums, to just share all activities that are happening in that field. Matt, you also had a comment in your hands raised, which would be really interesting to hear about, you using IATI data to do COVID in Palestine.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, so I've been doing, trying to help Palestine set up a COVID aid tracker for the last 2 weeks, and we currently, if we go onto dPortal and do a text search for COVID, we have 3 activities. And so just to say, we're tracking that, but the guidance would be super useful, because we've got searches for COVID, COVID-19 and coronavirus, which we check every day on dPortal. We haven't yet got round to figuring out how to do a more sophisticated search via the data store. But yeah, for us, the idea that if we could know which method different publishers were using, it would be very helpful, because we know we've got about 60 activities already in progress so far, but with the text search we can only see 3. So trying to know what we're doing wrong to pick them up, or whether those publishers just haven't republished yet, would be really useful, so I can keep my staff there motivated to carry on trying with IATI to do this.
That's really exciting, Matt. Thank you for sharing, because I think that's exactly feeds into the discussion around the guidance, feeding into the kind of user guidance with the publisher guidance and aligning that. And it seems like activities are already happening in that place. So making sure that that is indeed aligned. Any other feedback from anyone on that's really good? So I've already learned about some other activities happening and being able to coordinate that. Any other hands or feedback from people? Useful, I think, comments again around the specific kind of activities on the kind of Grand Bargain signatories already. And yeah, I think your questions on visualization, but also I think another important question a few people ask about diversion of funds and activities that we would want to address. Rory, you have your hands raised.
Hi, this is slightly incidental, but I'm also just really interested to hear from people who are privy to all the conversations that are going on internally within various institutions about this, because I think it's obviously completely unprecedented. And someone asked a question earlier about redistributing funds that are that have an existing classification, and that's definitely resonating with me, given some of the conversations I'm a part of. So I don't know if there's space to have a working group sort of slightly to the side of specific working practices, but I'd be interested in joining that if anyone else would.
I mean, up to if any people have any feedback. I think this webinar is also an opportunity for you to link and just share that. And Michelle has her hands up. Hi, Michelle.
Okay, hey there. No, in Rory's, to Rory's question, there's definitely a lot of that talk here at IOM about existing projects either being current funds being diverted or new funds being added, but to existing projects will have a new COVID stake or bent to it. And we're still working through how to capture that again within our basic systems. To then know how we're going to do it with IATI is going to be a different thing, because again, as you rightly pointed out, those of us that have a process that's fully automated, it's hard to change on a dime, and we weren't there yet with a lot of the humanitarian stuff. So we aren't going to be able to make that happen here, but we definitely are looking to capture the data, and when we can get there, we'll see about what we can do. But we do have a lot of projects that are being retooled for COVID.
Yeah, and what I would suggest, as I mentioned, we've posted already the kind of more technical consultations, some of the questions we've raised. More questions are coming up, and I think in other areas where you want to have a specific discussion, do go on IATI Discuss or start a conversation. I think those will be useful to share any knowledge on on that specific topic and how that's developing. Any other feedback for people or anything they want to share in the next 2-3 minutes before I kind of try and summarize and go through the next steps following the webinar? I think some more internal discussions going. Okay, I can't see any other raised hands. So thanks everyone. Matt, yes. Hi, Matt.
Minute one. When I was reviewing the Ebola documentation, what really struck me was that we've made some use cases for IATI before, and they're really helpful in being an intermediary between, us all understanding that transparency over COVID is a good idea, but before we get into the technical, work out what those use cases actually are, so that we can make sure they make sense. For example, for most recipient countries, having COVID-19, but without linking to the organizations you're funding, makes it very difficult to use, because then there's double counting. So maybe if we could have a few COVID use cases at the top of the guidance and show how the guidance would solve their issues, would really help focus us and help take some of those decisions.
Totally support that.
And stories or something.
Yeah. And that's where I think our kind of, from a secretariat and tech team point of view, is very much call for action for people to contribute with any of those kind of use cases or the questions that they're raising. And I would totally agree that it will be beneficial to contextualize it in the guidance. So if anyone would want to, I think on that specific ask, to kind of come with any suggestions, please do get in touch. +1, okay. I don't know if the +1 is volunteering for people for use cases or supporting the idea, but I do hope the former. I think it will be really, really good to hear from people on the use cases. I think it's probably more on supporting the idea. So let's do all work on that and do reach out to us. Okay, I think if no other hands have been raised, I think I'll move on to a bit of a summary and wrap up from today's webinar and from your contributions. So just moving on to next steps. A few of the things are happening. As you know, the webinar was kind of the kickoff and starting of the initial guidance. So a lot more will be happening next. So first of all, on IATI Discuss, yesterday we posted a consultation So framing the questions similar to the discussions we've just had. And that will be open for 2 weeks. So please do go to the to IATI Discuss and feed in your contributions. I think from today's discussions and feedback, there's a lot more additional questions coming in. So we will summarize the questions and kind of the feedbacks that you have and provide that as well. Do contact us directly by the help desk, or if you have any other feedback. Some of the suggestions already around use cases and examples, so it would be really, really great to hear from you. Then following the consultation and all discussions, we will then update the guidance document that you can now see, so incorporating those discussions. I think there was a clear message that there is a need for another webinar, another discussion, and a data use guidance. So that's something that we will be working on as well. And in terms of the tools and visualization, what's quite important linking to the data use guidance is making sure that the tools such as dPortal and the data store are indeed aligned with the guidance and provide that easy access to the data. So those are the main next steps. I think we really wanted the next 2 weeks to hear from you. So do get involved in the consultation. As I said, this webinar is being recorded. We will share the recording. We will also share the slides. And as I said, lots of useful feedback and questions in the chat box. So we will make sure that that's been captured, fed in, and the questions that you've had and we didn't have clear answers to at the moment, that we provide that as a Q&A based on the conversation. So I think that's it for today. Thank you very much for your contributions and for joining. And I really hope that that was useful to introduce. There will be more updates, a lot more consultation happening, and we really appreciate your time and feedback in something that's really, really important at the moment. And I think we all recognize the importance of open data and, you know, IATI contributing to that in what's quite difficult times at the moment for everyone. So thank you very much again, and do get in touch with us. We do want to hear from you again via the consultation or directly. Thank you very much.